The sound of polished shoes echoed through the marble floors of the Donovan estate. The mansion, sitting on acres of land outside Greenwich, Connecticut, was the kind of place people whispered about but never dared to step inside. Its owner, Charles Donovan, was one of the wealthiest real estate developers in the country, known for skyscrapers that touched the clouds and deals that shaped entire cities. But that morning the house was silent. 12-year-old Ethan Donovan lay curled in his bed, pale and weak. His usually bright hazel eyes were clouded with fatigue. The boy who once ran around the gardens chasing his golden retriever could barely sit up without help. "Daddy," his voice cracked, "why do I feel so tired all the time?" Charles swallowed hard. He wasn't used to questions he couldn't answer. His world was built on control, signatures on contracts, calculated risks, power that bent the rules. But this, his son's failing health, that was something money couldn't fix with a snap of his fingers. Beside him sat Amelia Donovan, Ethan's mother, dressed in a silk robe that somehow looked like armor. She rubbed her son's hand, hiding the fear in her face as she whispered, "The doctors will make you better, sweetheart, just rest." 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had collapsed during soccer practice at his private academy. Tests revealed a devastating truth: Ethan's kidneys were failing. Without a transplant, the doctors said, he had little chance of surviving beyond the next year. It was a nightmare the Donovans couldn't buy their way out of. Downstairs in the servants' quarters, Naomi Carter folded freshly washed sheets. She was 28, with smooth, dark skin, tired but kind eyes, and hands worn from years of scrubbing, lifting, and polishing. Naomi had come to the Donovan estate 2 years earlier, desperate for steady work. She had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce and dreams often died too young. Her father had been a mechanic, her mother a nurse's aide. But both passed away within months of each other, leaving Naomi alone with debt she could barely understand. She had taken the first job she could find, no matter how far from home. The Donovans paid well enough, but Naomi was invisible in that house. A shadow, a voice behind a door. She knew her place: clean, serve, and never step out of line. Still, she had grown attached to Ethan. Unlike the adults, he spoke to her without condescension. He would sit in the kitchen while she washed dishes, telling her about school, his favorite video games, or the stray cat he wanted to rescue from the yard. "Naomi," he'd once said, "you're my favorite person here." It had made her smile for the first time in weeks. So when she overheard the hushed whispers about his illness, her chest tightened with worry. The Donovans tried everything. Ethan's parents were tested, neither matched. His cousins, aunts, uncles, all either unsuitable or unwilling to take the risk. Charles offered money, posting discreet inquiries through private channels, but time slipped away and no perfect donor appeared. The boy grew weaker, his once round cheeks hollowed, his laughter silenced. Naomi noticed the change. She lingered outside his room while dusting, listening to his shallow breaths, her heart breaking a little more each day. One evening, she heard Amelia crying in the study. "Charles, what if we lose him? What if no one comes forward?" Charles clenched his jaw. "I'll pay whatever it takes. Someone will donate. Everyone has a price." But not everyone did, and Ethan didn't have months to wait. That night, Naomi lay awake in her small, windowless room. The hum of the washing machines in the basement was her only lullaby. She stared at the cracked ceiling, Ethan's weak smile flashing in her mind. She knew what she had to do. The thought terrified her. Surgery wasn't something she could afford to risk. She had no family, no one to care for her if something went wrong. But she also knew the boy upstairs didn't deserve to fade away because the world had failed him. The next morning, she quietly approached Amelia in the hallway. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Donovan, if it's possible, I'd like to be tested for Ethan." Amelia froze, startled. For a moment, she looked at Naomi as though she'd spoken out of turn, but desperation had stripped away her pride. You would do that?" Naomi nodded. "If I can help him, I want to." Within days, the tests came back. Against all odds, Naomi was a match. The news rippled through the Donovan household like lightning. Charles called Naomi into his office, a grand room with shelves of law books he'd never read. He stared at her across his mahogany desk, his fingers steepled. "You understand what this means?" he asked. His tone was sharp, businesslike, as though they were negotiating a deal. "Yes, sir," Naomi replied quietly. You'd be giving up a kidney, risking your life. Why would you do this for my son?" Naomi hesitated, her hands twisting in her apron. "Because he's a child, because he deserves a chance to grow up." Charles studied her, suspicious. "Are you hopping for money, a reward?" "No," Naomi whispered. "I don't want anything, just let him live." For the first time in years, Charles Donovan was at a loss for words. When Ethan was told, he looked up at Naomi with wide, tearful eyes. "You'd really do that for me?" he asked. Naomi knelt beside his bed, brushing his hair back. "Of course, sweet boy, you've still got too many soccer games to play. Someone has to make sure you get back out there." He threw his frail arms around her neck, and for the first time in months he smiled. The doctors explained everything. The surgery was dangerous, recovery would be long, and Naomi would live the rest of her life with just one kidney. For someone like her, with no health insurance, no safety net, it could mean disaster if complications arose. But Naomi didn't flinch. She signed the forms. Amelia wept with gratitude. "You're saving him," she said, gripping Naomi's hands. Charles said nothing. His face was unreadable, his mind churning with thoughts no one else could hear. On the night before the surgery, Naomi sat alone in the hospital room assigned to her. The antiseptic smell burned her nose. She clutched a small photograph of her parents, whispering a prayer under her breath. Meanwhile, back at the Donovan estate, Charles poured himself a glass of scotch. He stared out at the sprawling city skyline in the distance, unease prickling at him. Something about the Maid's sacrifice unsettled him. Why would someone like Naomi, poor, with nothing, give up everything for his son? What was she hiding? He didn't know it yet, but this act of kindness was about to unravel secrets that would shake his entire world. The early morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of St. Mary's Medical Center, casting a cold glow over the waiting room. Amelia sat stiffly in her chair, her manicured nails tapping against the armrest. She couldn't keep still. Across from her, Charles sat with his elbows on his knees, his expensive suit looking out of place among the faint smell of antiseptic and the faint cries of distant patients. Naomi was already being prepped for surgery. She had signed the last of the consent forms, her neat handwriting trembling slightly on the page. The nurse had reassured her, but nothing could erase the weight in her chest. "Ma'am, you'll do fine," the nurse had whispered, adjusting Naomi's IV line. "You're doing something extraordinary." Naomi gave a faint smile. "I'm just doing what feels right." On the other side of the hospital, Ethan lay in a separate room, hooked up to machines that hummed and beeped in steady rhythm. His small fingers fidgeted with the hospital blanket. He looked up at his father, his eyes a blend of fear and hope. "Dad, what if it doesn't work?" Ethan's voice was a fragile thread. Charles swallowed hard, forcing a steadiness he didn't feel. "It will, son, you just hang in there." But in his mind a storm raged. The doors to the surgical wing swung open and two gurneys rolled down the corridor, one carrying Naomi, the other prepared for Ethan. For a brief moment their paths crossed. Ethan turned his head and caught sight of Naomi. Their eyes met. She lifted her hand slightly, offering him the softest of waves. He smiled faintly before the nurses wheeled him away. "All right, Miss Carter," said Dr. Miller, the lead surgeon, his voice calm and practiced. "We're going to take good care of you, just breathe deeply." The anesthesia mask lowered over Naomi's face, and within seconds the world dissolved into black. For hours, the surgery unfolded behind closed doors. Charles paced the waiting area like a caged lion, his phone buzzing constantly with business calls he ignored. Amelia clutched a rosary in her palms, whispering prayers. Finally, the doors opened. Dr. Miller stepped out, his surgical cap still on, his face weary but relieved. The operation was a success. Both Naomi and Ethan are stable. The kidney is functioning well. Amelia gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. She gripped Charles's arm. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice breaking. For the first time in weeks, Charles let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed over him, but it was tangled with something else. Suspicion, unease. 2 days later, Ethan sat propped up in his hospital bed, color slowly returning to his cheeks. His laugh, weak but real, filled the room as he watched cartoons. Amelia spoon-fed him pudding, her smile unshakable. Across the hall, Naomi lay in a smaller, quieter room. Her body ached, her movements slow, but she didn't complain. She had no visitors, no flowers, no fancy meals, just silence. When Ethan insisted on visiting her, Amelia reluctantly wheeled him across the hall. "Naomi," Ethan's voice lit up the room. He shuffled toward her bed, dragging his IV pole. "You saved me." Naomi smiled, her eyes shining with quiet joy. "I told you, you've got more soccer games to play." He hugged her gently, careful not to hurt her. Amelia's lips trembled as she watched, guilt creeping in. Naomi had given her son life, and yet here she was, standing awkwardly, unable to express the gratitude that swelled in her chest. Charles entered moments later. He stood at the doorway, watching the scene. His jaw tightened as Naomi stroked Ethan's hair like a second mother. Later that night, Charles cornered Dr. Miller in the corridor. "You're absolutely certain she was a match?" Charles asked. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Yes, a remarkably good one, in fact, almost as if they were." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, it's rare but not impossible." Ethan's body accepted the kidney beautifully. "Almost as if they were what?" Charles pressed. Dr. Miller sighed, "Almost as if they were related, but genetics can be strange sometimes." Charles's stomach lurched. Related? That word clung to him like a shadow. He shook it off, telling himself it was nonsense. Naomi was just a maid. She had no connection to his family. And yet the thought refused to leave. Amelia insisted they do something for Naomi. "Charles, we can't just let her go back to scrubbing floors after this. She gave our son life." Charles nodded stiffly. "We'll compensate her." But Amelia frowned. "I'm not talking about money. I mean, she should be treated like family." Family, the word stung. The next morning, Charles visited Naomi's room alone. She was half asleep, the hum of machines steady in the background. He cleared his throat and her eyes fluttered open. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like someone punched me in the side," she murmured, managing a small smile. "But I'll be fine." Charles studied her carefully. "Why did you really do it? Don't tell me it's just because he's a child. People don't risk their lives for someone else's kid unless there's more to it." Naomi's expression faltered. Her lips parted but no words came. Charles leaned closer, his voice low. "What aren't you telling me?" Her eyes darted away, brimming with something she didn't dare say. 3 days later, Naomi was discharged. The Donovans insisted she return to the mansion rather than the small apartment she rented across town. Amelia prepared the guest room on the second floor, an unthinkable act in a house where staff never crossed into the family's wing. At dinner that night, Ethan sat beside Naomi at the long oak table, refusing to eat unless she was there. Amelia smiled softly at the sight, but Charles barely touched his food. He watched Naomi, every gesture, every glance, like a man studying a puzzle. After Ethan was sent to bed, Charles called Naomi into his study. "You need to be honest with me," he said, pouring himself another drink. "Is there something I don't know, something about you and Ethan?" Naomi's hands trembled, her voice cracked. "Mr. Donovan, please, I did this because I couldn't bear to see him suffer, that's all." But her eyes told another story, a story she wasn't ready to share. For weeks, things seemed calm. Ethan grew stronger, laughing again, running down the halls. Naomi continued to heal, helping when she could, resting when she couldn't. Amelia treated her with newfound warmth, almost like a sister. But Charles couldn't shake the doctor's words. Almost as if they were related. He began making quiet phone calls, reaching out to private investigators, pulling strings only a man of his wealth could pull. He wanted answers, and he intended to get them. Naomi, meanwhile, felt the pressure mounting. Every time Charles's eyes locked on hers, she felt her secret pressing harder against her chest, threatening to break free. Because she knew the truth. And if it came out, it wouldn't just change Ethan's life. It would destroy the Donovan family forever. The Donovan estate seemed quieter than usual. Though the house was still alive with polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the scent of freshly cut roses in the foyer. Yet beneath the calm, Charles carried a storm inside him. He watched Naomi from a distance. She moved carefully through the halls, still recovering, but Ethan clung to her presence like a lifeline. When he laughed, when he smiled, when he ran through the gardens again, it was always with Naomi at his side. Everyone seemed grateful. Amelia spoke of Naomi as though she were an angel. Ethan called her his hero. But Charles couldn't let it go. Almost as if they were related. The doctor's words gnawed at him every night. So Charles did what he knew best. He started digging. Late one evening, Charles picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus Hale," came the gruff voice on the other end. "It's Donovan," Charles said. "I need you to run a background check. Quietly, discretion is non-negotiable." Marcus chuckled. "When isn't it? Send me her name." Charles hesitated, staring at the glow of his desk lamp. "Naomi Carter, 28, lives in Birmingham," before coming here. Marcus whistled low. "You want me to tear the ground beneath her feet?" "I want the truth," Charles replied coldly. Meanwhile, Naomi sat on the balcony of the guest room, staring into the night. Her body still ached from surgery, but it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the secret. She thought of Ethan's smile, his laugh, his arms wrapped around her in gratitude. She thought of the way Amelia looked at her now as though she was family. And then she thought of Charles, his sharp eyes, his suspicion. She had always known the day might come. The truth couldn't stay buried forever, but she had prayed it wouldn't come like this. Not when Ethan's life depended on peace. Not when everything could shatter. 2 weeks later, Marcus Hale appeared at Charles's office downtown, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Charles dismissed his secretary and locked the door. "What do you have?" Marcus set the folder down. "Your maid isn't just some desperate woman from Birmingham. She has a past, one you need to hear." Charles flipped open the folder, scanning the documents. His eyes narrowed as he read. Naomi Carter, born in Birmingham, Alabama. Father, deceased mechanic. Mother, nurse's aide, deceased, no siblings. He flipped to the next page, a hospital record. His stomach dropped. Gave birth at 16 years old. Baby boy, adoption record sealed. Charles froze, the words blurred in front of him. A child. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, she had a kid she gave up for adoption. Records don't name the adoptive family, it's sealed tight, but the timeline's interesting, huh?" Charles's pulse thundered in his ears. Ethan was 12. Naomi had given birth 12 years ago. "No," he muttered, "that's impossible." But the seed of doubt had grown roots. That evening, Charles returned home and watched Ethan play in the garden. Naomi sat nearby, reading a book, occasionally smiling as Ethan called out to her. Charles's hands tightened into fists, the resemblance, the way Ethan looked at her, the connection that seemed too natural, too easy. He couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, after Amelia fell asleep, Charles poured himself a drink and stared at the city lights from his study. The thought twisted inside him, sharp and ugly. Could Ethan be Naomi's son? No, Ethan was his. He remembered the day Amelia gave birth. He remembered holding the tiny infant in his arms. He remembered the nurses congratulating them. But still, the doubt was eating him alive. The next morning, Charles found Naomi in the kitchen, her hands deep in dishwater. "Naomi," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. She looked up, startled. "Yes, sir." "I need to know the truth." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Did you give up a child 12 years ago?" Her face drained of color, her hands stilled in the water. "Who told you that?" "So it's true," Charles hissed. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't." Charles slammed his glass down on the counter, the sound sharp. "Don't what?" "Don't find out that my son might not even be mine." Naomi gasped, covering her mouth. "Tell me," he demanded. But she shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't, not like this. Please, Mr. Donovan, let it go." Her refusal only hardened his resolve. Charles was not a man who lived with unanswered questions. The next week, he made arrangements. A quiet favor from a friend at a private clinic. He collected a strand of Ethan's hair from his pillow. He convinced Naomi to take a routine blood test framed as part of her post-surgery recovery. When the samples were sent off, Charles felt a sick weight in his chest. He told himself he didn't believe it. He told himself it was impossible. But deep down, a part of him already knew. That afternoon, Naomi sat with Ethan on the porch. The boy leaned against her, content. "Naomi," he whispered, "do you think I'll get to play soccer again?" "Of course you will," she said softly, smoothing his hair. You'll run faster than ever, stronger than ever." He smiled. "You sound like my mom." Naomi's heart clenched. She kissed the top of his head when no one was looking, her tears falling silently. Because he wasn't wrong. A week later, the envelope arrived. Charles sat in his study, the paper heavy in his trembling hands. He tore it open, his eyes scanned the words, his heart nearly stopped. Paternity likelihood 0%, maternal match 99.9%. The glass of scotch slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor. Ethan wasn't his son. Ethan was Naomi's. The revelation burned through Charles like fire. Every memory, every smile, every bedtime story, it wasn't his, it wasn't real. His entire life had been built on control, on certainty. And now, it had all been ripped away by a maid with tired eyes and a secret she had buried for 12 years. He stormed upstairs, his footsteps shaking the marble staircase. Naomi was in the guest room folding laundry. She looked up as he entered, her face pale. "You lied to me," Charles growled, his voice shaking with rage. Naomi dropped the shirt in her hands, her lips trembling. "You lied about everything. He's your son." Naomi's tears fell freely now. She pressed her hand to her chest, her voice breaking. "I didn't lie. I gave him up because I had no choice. And then, he ended up here. I never planned for this. I never wanted to take him from you. I just wanted him to live." Her words were desperate, raw pleading. But Charles wasn't listening. His world had shattered, and the woman who had saved his son had also stolen him. The truth had finally come out. And nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the Donovan estate had changed. It was thicker, colder, like a storm cloud hanging over the marble halls and glittering chandeliers. Servants tiptoed quietly, avoiding Charles's eyes, even Amelia. Usually vibrant and composed, had grown pale and restless. She sensed something, though she didn't yet know the truth. Charles hadn't spoken a word to Naomi since that night in the guest room when he had confronted her. His silence was worse than his rage. He passed her in the halls as though she were invisible, though his eyes burned with a hatred she could feel in her bones. Naomi, still recovering, carried the weight of her secret with every step. Her body ached, but her heart ached more. She had wanted to protect Ethan. She had wanted to give him a chance at life. But now she feared she had destroyed everything. And Amelia, she was about to learn the truth that would break her. It began innocently. Amelia was in the study one afternoon, sorting through Charles's papers, something she rarely did. He was careless with documents when distracted, and in recent days, distraction clung to him like a shadow. At the bottom of a drawer, she found a torn envelope, a medical logo on the corner. Her curiosity deepened. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper inside. Her eyes scanned the lines, her breath caught. Paternity likelihood 0%, maternal match 99.9%. The room spun. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into the leather chair. The paper trembled in her grip. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, no." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. For 12 years she had believed Ethan was hers and Charles's. She had raised him, loved him, held him through every fever, every nightmare. And now the truth cut her open. Ethan wasn't hers at all. That night, Amelia stormed into the guest room where Naomi sat folding Ethan's laundry. "How dare you?" Amelia's voice cracked, raw with betrayal. Naomi froze, the folded shirt slipping from her hands. "Mrs. Donovan." "Don't you dare call me that," Amelia spat, her eyes blazing. She held up the paper like a weapon. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think this lie could stay buried forever?" Naomi's lips trembled. "I never meant for it to come out this way." "This way?" Amelia screamed. "You mean the way you wormed your way into my house, my son's heart, into my family, and then tried to play the hero?" Naomi's tears fell. "He was dying. I couldn't just watch. I didn't do this to hurt you." Amelia's chest heaved, fury and grief colliding. "He is mine. Do you understand me? I raised him. I am his mother, not you, never you." Her words were daggers, but Naomi didn't fight back. She simply wept silently, her body trembling with the pain of truths too heavy to bear. In the doorway, Charles appeared, his face a mask of stone. He said nothing, only watching as the two women tore apart the fragile piece that had held their world together. The next morning, Charles summoned Naomi into his study. Amelia sat beside him, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes swollen from crying. "Tell us," Charles said coldly, "all of it, no more lies." Naomi stood at the center of the room, her hands clasped. She had never felt so small, so exposed, but there was no point in hiding anymore. "I was 16, she began, her voice soft but steady. "I was young, stupid, and alone. The boy I thought loved me left when I told him I was pregnant. My parents were devastated, but they tried to help. When Ethan was born, he was perfect, but I had nothing. No money, no future. My parents begged me to think of his future, not my pride. They said adoption was the only way, so I let him go." Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought he'd go to a good family. I thought I was giving him a chance I could never give. I never knew it was you. I never knew he was here in this house. Until the day he smiled at me and I felt something I couldn't explain." She pressed her hands against her heart, her sobs breaking the room's silence. "I never wanted to take him from you. I only wanted to save him." Amelia shot to her feet, her face pale with rage. "Save him? You think that makes you his mother? You think your blood gives you the right?" Naomi shook her head desperately. "No, I know you're his mother. You raised him. You loved him. I'm not trying to take that from you." But Amelia wasn't convinced. To her, Naomi's presence was poison, a reminder that the child she thought was hers had another claim. Charles remained silent, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. Later that evening, Ethan wandered the halls, still frail but curious. He had heard the shouting. He had seen his mother's red eyes, his father's grim silence, and then, as he passed the study, he caught fragments of Naomi's words. "I gave him up, he's my son." The world stopped. Ethan froze, his small hands trembling, his chest tightened as the pieces clicked together. Naomi wasn't just his maid, she wasn't just the woman who had saved him. She was his real mother. Tears stung his eyes as he stumbled back to his room, his heart shattering under the weight of the truth. That night, Ethan refused to eat. He curled into his bed, staring at the ceiling, silent and broken. When Amelia entered to comfort him, he flinched. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked softly, reaching for him. "You lied to me," he whispered, his voice trembling. Amelia's heart cracked. "No, baby, I didn't. I heard her. Naomi's my mom, not you. Why didn't you tell me?" The tears came faster now, hot and heavy. Amelia tried to hold him, but he pulled away. In the doorway, Charles watched silently, torn between rage and despair. Naomi, standing down the hall, pressed a hand to her chest, hearing Ethan's words like a dagger twisting in her soul. By midnight, Charles sat alone in the study, a glass of untouched whiskey on the desk. He had built skyscrapers, brokered billion-dollar deals, outsmarted rivals, but he had no idea how to hold his family together now. Finally, he whispered into the silence, "We can't let this ruin him." The door creaked open. Amelia stepped inside, her face streaked with tears. "It already has." Behind her, Naomi lingered in the shadows, her own tears falling. 3 lives, bound by blood and lies, stood on the edge of collapse. And none of them knew what the morning would bring. The Donovan mansion no longer felt like home, it felt like a battlefield. Every hallway carried the weight of whispers. Servants lowered their voices when Naomi passed, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Amelia's eyes were red from nights spent crying, her once perfect composure cracked beyond repair. And Charles was a storm barely contained, walking through his own estate like a general plotting a war. But the one most broken was Ethan. The boy who once brought warmth to every room now barely spoke. He kept to himself, refusing to play in the garden or watch cartoons. He avoided Amelia's touch, and though he still looked at Naomi with something close to longing, he wouldn't go near her either. He was 12, but in those days he looked so much older, like a boy who had been robbed of childhood. On the 4th night after the truth spilled, Amelia cornered Charles in the study. Her voice was sharp, trembling with fury. "This cannot go on, Charles," she said, her arms crossed tightly. "He's confused, he's hurting, and it's her fault." Charles set his glass down with a deliberate clink. "It's not that simple." "Not that simple?" Amelia's voice cracked. "She's poisoned everything. My son doesn't even look at me anymore." "Our son," Charles corrected automatically, though his voice faltered at the word our. Amelia's lips curled bitterly. Don't you start, Charles, don't you dare, you saw the results, you know the truth as well as I do, he isn't yours, he isn't mine, he's hers. The silence between them was thick, choking. Finally, Charles muttered, he's ours in every way that matters. Blood doesn't erase 12 years of love. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Then why does it feel like it does? She turned and left before Charles could answer. Naomi stayed mostly in her room, ashamed to show her face. Every time she thought about Ethan overhearing her words, her stomach twisted. She hadn't meant for him to find out this way. She hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She told herself she should leave, that disappearing was the only way to give Ethan peace. But every time she tried to imagine packing her things and walking away, she froze. Because walking away meant leaving Ethan again, and she didn't think she could survive that twice. The storm broke one Saturday morning. Ethan was sitting on the staircase hugging his knees when Naomi came down carrying fresh linens. Their eyes met. For the first time in days, he didn't look away. Ethan, she whispered. He swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me? Naomi set the linens aside and knelt in front of him, her voice trembling. Because I didn't want to hurt you. I thought it was better if you never knew. But you're my mom, he said, his voice cracking. Why didn't you want me? The question shattered her, tears filled her eyes. I always wanted you, baby, always, but I was 16, I had nothing, no money, no way to take care of you, I thought I was giving you a better life. Ethan's lip quivered, but you gave me away. Naomi reached for his hands and to her relief, he let her hold them. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. Do you know how many nights I cried, wondering if you were okay, wondering if you were safe? Not a day went by that I didn't think of you. His eyes brimmed with tears. So you never stopped loving me? Naomi shook her head. Never, not for 1 second. He collapsed into her arms, sobbing. I don't know what to do, I don't know who I belong to. Naomi held him tightly, rocking him like he was still a baby. You belong to yourself, Ethan, and to the people who love you. That will never change. For the first time in days, Ethan let himself cry, not in silence but in his mother's arms. What neither of them noticed was Amelia standing at the top of the staircase, watching. Her face was pale, her heart breaking. That night, Amelia confronted Charles again. I can't do this, she said, packing. I can't compete with her. He looks at her like she's the only one who matters. Do you know what that does to me, do you? Charles rubbed his temples. Amelia, you're his mother too. No, I'm not, she snapped. Not anymore, not in his eyes, and maybe not in yours either. Her voice cracked at the last words. Charles looked at her, startled. What are you saying? She bit her lip, trembling. I'm saying maybe I should leave. Maybe it's better for him if I'm not here. The words hung in the air like thunder. Leave, Charles repeated, his voice low, dangerous. You'd walk away from him, from me. Amelia's tears spilled over. He isn't mine, Charles. Every time I look at him now, all I see is her, and I don't know how to live with that. For once, Charles had no answer. But Charles had his own demons clawing at him. That same week, Marcus Hale, the investigator, called again. Donovan, I dug deeper into the adoption records, something you should know. Charles gripped the phone tighter. What is it? There was money involved, Marcus said. A lot of it, paid to the agency to fast-track the adoption. The file doesn't name names, but whoever adopted Naomi's baby 12 years ago pulled serious strings. Charles froze. Are you saying? I'm saying this adoption wasn't random. Someone wanted that child, someone with power. Charles's heart slammed in his chest. Amelia's family, her father had connections, influence, enough to make a child disappear into their world. His mind raced. Had Amelia known? Had she known from the start who Ethan really was? The truth unraveled faster than he expected. Late one night, Charles found Amelia in the study again, staring at the adoption papers she had hidden in her drawer. You knew, he said, his voice ice. Amelia spun around, her face pale. Charles. You knew he wasn't yours from the very beginning. Her silence was an answer. Charles's chest heaved. All those years you lied to me. Amelia's hands shook. I didn't lie, I didn't tell you. My father arranged it. He said it was better if we never spoke of it. I wanted a child, Charles, and when Ethan came, I loved him like he was mine. Charles staggered back as though struck. All this time you knew he was hers. Amelia's tears streamed down her face. I didn't know it was Naomi, I didn't know it was the maid scrubbing my floors. But yes, I knew he wasn't mine, and I prayed every day you'd never find out. The betrayal sank into Charles's bones, his wife, his perfect, polished wife. She had built their life on lies. The next morning, Charles called Naomi to the study. She stood before him nervously, hands clasped. I know everything, he said coldly. Amelia knew, she knew from the beginning that you were his mother. Her father arranged the adoption. Naomi's knees nearly buckled. She knew. Charles nodded grimly. She's lied to both of us for 12 years. Naomi pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Oh my God. I don't know what happens next, Charles said, his voice low. But I know one thing, nothing in this house will ever be the same. Unbeknownst to them, Ethan was outside the study door listening again. His heart pounded as the truth piled higher, heavier, crushing him. His mother wasn't really his mother, his father wasn't really his father. And the woman he thought was just a maid, the woman who gave him life twice, once in birth and once in sacrifice, was the only piece of truth he had left. That night, Ethan disappeared. When the household awoke the next morning, his bed was empty, the sheets cold. A note lay on the pillow, written in shaky handwriting. I don't know who I am anymore, don't come looking for me. Amelia screamed when she read it. Naomi collapsed into tears, and Charles, for the first time in his life, felt powerless. The boy they had all fought for, the boy who tied them together and tore them apart, was gone. And finding him would reveal truths darker than any of them could imagine. The Donovan estate was chaos. Servants rushed through the halls whispering, phones rang endlessly, and Amelia's sobs could be heard from behind the locked bedroom door. Naomi sat on the edge of the couch in the grand living room, her hands trembling in her lap, eyes bloodshot from crying. Charles stood near the window, his jaw clenched, staring into the gray dawn like it held the answers he needed. But no one knew where Ethan was. No one. Detectives were called within the hour. Patrol cars lined the driveway. The estate gates stood open as officers questioned every servant, gardener, and guard. Any sign of him? Charles asked Marcus Hale, who had rushed over the moment he heard. Marcus shook his head grimly. We checked the grounds, he's not here, no footprints near the gates, no forced entry, which means he walked out on his own, Charles finished, his voice tight. Naomi buried her face in her hands. He's just a boy, he doesn't even know where to go, what if something happens to him? Charles's voice softened for the first time in days. We'll find him, Naomi, I promise. But finding Ethan wasn't going to be easy. The detectives traced the streets near the mansion. They found a neighbor who remembered seeing a small boy walking along the road around midnight, wearing a hoodie and carrying a small backpack. But after that, the trail went cold. Naomi clutched the boy's photo to her chest, whispering silent prayers. Every second felt like an eternity. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, his trembling voice asking if she still loved him, his tears soaking into her shoulder. I should have told him sooner, she thought bitterly. I should have fought harder for him, maybe then he wouldn't have run. Meanwhile, Amelia grew more frantic by the hour. She refused to leave her room at first, then burst out, storming through the halls, demanding updates. When Charles tried to calm her, she lashed out. This is your fault, she shouted, her face pale and wild. You let her stay here, you let her confuse him, you've destroyed everything, Charles. Charles's voice thundered through the halls. Don't you dare put this on me, Amelia. You knew the truth. You knew from the beginning that boy wasn't yours, and you lied to me for 12 years, and now he's gone. Amelia's lip trembled, but instead of arguing, she broke into sobs and collapsed to the floor. Naomi, watching from the corner, felt no satisfaction, only sorrow. Because whatever Amelia had done, one truth remained: Ethan was still missing. Ethan, meanwhile, wandered the dark streets of the city. The night air was cold, biting through his thin jacket. He pulled the hood tighter around his face and clutched the backpack against his chest. He had only a few dollars he'd taken from a drawer in his room. Not much food, no phone, no plan. But he couldn't stay in that house anymore, not after everything he'd heard. He couldn't bear Amelia's desperate eyes, couldn't handle his father's silence, and Naomi's love both comforted and terrified him. He didn't know who he was anymore, and until he figured it out, he couldn't go back. By the second day, the media had caught wind of the story. Headlines blared across every network. Billionaire son missing after family scandal. Adoption secrets tear Donovan family apart. Poor Maid revealed as biological mother of billionaire heir. Reporters swarmed outside the estate gates, cameras flashed, questions flew. Naomi couldn't even step outside without being hounded. "Do you regret giving him up?" one reporter shouted. "Are you trying to steal the boy back from the Donovans?" another demanded. Tears streamed down Naomi's cheeks as guards ushered her back inside. Charles watched the chaos unfold with disgust. His empire, his name, his reputation, everything was unraveling in front of the entire nation. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care about money or power. He cared only about finding his son. That night, Charles sat alone in his study, staring at a photo of Ethan smiling on his 10th birthday. Marcus entered quietly, holding a folder. "I may have something," he said. Charles looked up sharply. "Tell me." Marcus laid out a series of photos. Security footage from a bus station downtown, taken yesterday morning. That's him. Charles's heart leapt. The grainy image showed Ethan boarding a bus, head down, clutching his backpack. "Where was the bus headed?" Charles demanded. Marcus flipped through his notes. "Philadelphia." Charles stood, grabbing his coat. "I'm going after him." Naomi appeared in the doorway. "I'm coming with you." Charles hesitated. "Naomi." "He needs me," she said firmly, her eyes blazing with determination. "More than he's ever needed anyone. You can't stop me." Charles searched her face, then nodded slowly. "Fine, let's bring our son home." The bus ride Ethan had taken was long. When he arrived in Philadelphia, the city loomed large, unfamiliar, and unforgiving. He wandered the streets aimlessly, too scared to ask for help, too proud to admit he was lost. By nightfall, he found himself near a homeless shelter. A kind volunteer noticed him shivering and brought him inside, giving him food and a blanket. "Where are your parents, kid?" the man asked gently. Ethan looked down at his shoes. "I don't know." The volunteer frowned but didn't press further. For that night at least, Ethan was safe. Back at the estate, Amelia spiraled further into despair. She sat in the dark, clutching Ethan's childhood toys, rocking back and forth. Her mind replayed everything: the moment she first held him as a baby, the way he used to cling to her leg when he was little, the sound of his laughter echoing through the halls. She had wanted so badly to be his mother, and in her heart she still believed she was, but Naomi's presence, the blood connection, had destroyed that fragile illusion. Now Ethan was gone, and Amelia feared he would never forgive her. When Charles and Naomi arrived in Philadelphia, they wasted no time. They split up, scouring bus stations, shelters, and street corners with Ethan's photo. Hours turned into a day turned into two. Exhaustion dragged at their bodies, but desperation kept them moving. Finally, late on the third night, Naomi spotted a boy curled up on the steps of a shelter. Her heart stopped. "Ethan," she cried, running forward. The boy stirred, lifting his head. His eyes widened. "Mom!" Naomi dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Oh, baby, thank God, I thought I lost you." Charles arrived moments later, his face pale with relief. He pulled both of them into his embrace, tears glistening in his eyes. "You're safe now," he whispered fiercely. "You're coming home." But Ethan pulled back, his face torn. "Home? I don't know where that is anymore." Naomi cupped his face in her hands. "Home is wherever we're together, do you hear me? That's all that matters." For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to believe her. Back at the estate, Amelia was waiting when they returned. The sight of Ethan nearly brought her to her knees. She rushed forward, arms outstretched. "Ethan," she cried, "oh, thank God you're safe." But Ethan froze. He stepped back, his hand tightening around Naomi's. The rejection hit Amelia like a knife to the chest. Naomi saw the pain in her eyes and whispered softly, "Ethan, she loves you too." But Ethan shook his head. "She lied to me, she lied to all of us." Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt you, I wanted to be your mother." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, in a small, trembling voice, he whispered, "But you're not." The words shattered Amelia completely. And from that moment on, the fragile threads holding the Donovan family together began to unravel beyond repair. The Donovan estate had never felt so quiet. After Ethan's return, the walls carried no laughter, no warmth, only the weight of broken truths. Even the servants tiptoed through the halls as though one wrong sound might ignite another explosion. Ethan spent most of his time in his room, avoiding both Amelia and Charles. Naomi was the only one he allowed near, often sitting beside him while he drew silently or stared out the window. But even Naomi could see it. The boy was drifting, torn between the pieces of two worlds. Amelia, meanwhile, unraveled. She rarely left her room. When she did, her once elegant appearance was gone, replaced by disheveled hair, hollow eyes, and clothes wrinkled from nights of restless packing. She watched Ethan from afar, aching to hold him, to remind him of the years they had shared. But every time she tried to approach, he pulled back. Once she whispered, "I love you," as he passed in the hallway. Ethan kept walking, his hand tightening around Naomi's. The rejection gutted her. Charles tried to hold the house together, but the pressure mounted from every side. His company's board of directors called daily. The scandal had bled into the markets. Shares in Donovan Industries were plummeting. Investors whispered about instability, about leadership compromised by domestic turmoil. One morning, Marcus Hale arrived with grim news. "They've launched a formal review," he said, laying documents on Charles's desk. "If the board votes, they could force you to step down as CEO." Charles's chest tightened. "Over this, over my personal life." Marcus's tone was flat. "To them, there's no difference. Your name is the company. If your reputation burns, so does the brand." Charles clenched his fists. For the first time in his empire-building career, he felt the ground shift beneath him. Naomi saw it too. Late one night, she found Charles in the study, staring into a glass of whiskey. His shoulders slumped in a way she had never seen. "You're losing everything," she said softly. Charles didn't look up. "Maybe I already have." Naomi hesitated, then asked, "What if this isn't about the company? What if it's about Ethan? Maybe the universe is forcing you to choose what really matters." Charles's eyes met hers, raw and pained. "And what if I don't know how to choose?" Naomi placed a trembling hand on his. "Then maybe it's time you learn." But outside the mansion, the storm grew darker. One evening, Marcus returned with another revelation. "Donovan, this wasn't just a scandal, it was a setup." Charles's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Marcus slid a folder across the desk. Inside were emails, financial records, and photographs. "Your father-in-law," Marcus said grimly. "Amelia's father. He orchestrated the adoption 12 years ago. He paid off the agency, fast-tracked the paperwork, made sure Naomi's baby went straight into Amelia's arms, and now he's the one leaking the story to the press." Charles's blood ran cold. "Why?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Because your company threatened his. He's been bleeding money for years. Destroying you through your family was the cleanest way to get revenge." Charles's hand shook as he slammed the folder shut. Betrayal upon betrayal. Amelia, her father, the very foundation of his marriage, all built on lies. Naomi heard the news too, and for the first time she felt fear. If Amelia's father had arranged everything once, what was stopping him from acting again? What if he tried to take Ethan away legally, forcefully, under the guise of protecting his grandson? She rushed to Ethan's room that night, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Promise me something," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Promise me you won't let anyone take you away from me again." Ethan looked at her, frightened by the intensity in her voice. "I promise, Mom." The word Mom shattered her heart open. Amelia, meanwhile, sank deeper into despair. She confronted her father in a heated phone call, her voice breaking. "You destroyed me, you destroyed everything. Why would you do this to us?" Her father's voice was cold. "I did what I had to do. You wanted a child, I gave you one. Now it's time you stand aside and let me clean up this mess." "Stand aside," Amelia whispered, horrified. "Yes," he said. "Naomi's presence weakens everything. Charles's empire is crumbling. If Ethan is placed under my guardianship, we can restore stability. The boy belongs with us, not with her." Amelia's stomach turned. "He isn't a weapon, he's my son." Her father's laugh was bitter. You've always been too sentimental. That's why Charles never really respected you. That's why Naomi will win, because she'll do what you can't. She'll fight for him." The line went dead. Amelia collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. For the first time, she realized her father had never cared about Ethan. To him, the boy was nothing more than a pawn. The next morning, Charles gathered Naomi and Amelia in the study. His face was pale, his voice grave. "Amelia's father is moving against us. He wants Ethan. He'll use the courts, the press, whatever it takes. We have to protect him." Amelia's voice trembled. "And how do you suggest we do that? By exposing my father, by destroying what's left of my family?" Charles's gaze hardened. "If it comes to that, yes." Naomi spoke quietly but firmly. "We have no choice. Ethan's safety comes first." For once, Amelia didn't argue. She only lowered her eyes, broken. But Ethan overheard again. From the crack of the study door, he caught every word, and the realization hit him like a tidal wave. He wasn't just a son caught between two mothers. He wasn't just a boy confused by love and lies. He was a prize in a war, a pawn in a battle of power. And for the first time, anger flared in his chest. That night, Ethan confronted them all. "I'm not a game piece," he shouted, his small voice shaking the walls. "I'm not a prize you can fight over. I'm me, and I'm sick of all of you pretending to love me when you just want to win." Naomi froze, her heart breaking. "Ethan, no." "Yes," he cried. "You, Mom, you gave me away. You, Amelia, you lied to me. And you, Dad," he looked at Charles, his eyes blazing. "You care more about your company than you ever cared about me." The silence was deafening. Then Ethan's voice cracked, softer now, filled with pain. "Maybe I should just leave again. Maybe none of you deserve me." And before anyone could stop him, he ran from the room. Naomi sank to her knees, sobbing. Amelia covered her face with trembling hands. And Charles stood frozen, realizing his empire wasn't the only thing crumbling. He was losing his son. But the darkest twist was still to come. The next morning, police arrived at the Donovan estate. A warrant had been filed. A court order granted temporary guardianship of Ethan to Amelia's father. Naomi's scream echoed through the mansion as officers approached Ethan's room. Charles fought, shouting, threatening lawsuits. Amelia begged them to stop. But the law was clear. Ethan was taken away in the back of a black car, his face pressed to the window, tears streaming down his cheeks. And as the gates closed behind him, the Donovan family collapsed into ruin. Naomi fainted from shock. Amelia screamed until her voice broke. And Charles stood in the driveway, fists clenched, swearing to himself that he would burn the world down before he let his son go forever. The black sedan carrying Ethan vanished beyond the Donovan gates, but its absence lingered like a wound no one could close. Naomi lay faint on the marble floor, her chest rising in shallow breaths. Amelia collapsed into a chair, staring blankly ahead, her hands shaking violently. And Charles stood like stone, his rage barely contained, his entire empire and family slipping from his grasp. The next morning, the headlines screamed louder than ever. Donovan heir removed by court order, custody awarded to maternal grandfather. Scandal deepens, billionaire powerless as child taken. Charles slammed the newspapers onto the desk, his voice like thunder. "This ends now, he's not taking my son." Naomi, her eyes red from sleepless crying, whispered, "But the court order, it's legal. How do we fight this?" Marcus Hale, standing grimly by the window, answered, "We fight the only way left, in court, but be warned, your father-in-law has judges in his pocket. This won't be a fair fight." Charles's eyes burned with determination. "Then we don't fight fair either." The custody hearing became the trial of the century. Every reporter in America lined up outside the courthouse. Cameras flashed, protesters chanted. Some carried signs demanding justice for Ethan. Others shouted insults at Naomi, branding her unfit, calling her a maid who wanted riches. Naomi walked into court with trembling hands, but when Ethan glanced at her from across the room, sitting stiffly beside his grandfather, her spine straightened. She would not let them take him, not again. Inside, the courtroom was tense. Amelia's father, Leonard Whitmore, sat tall and smug, his expensive lawyers flanking him like armor. Amelia sat behind him, her face pale, avoiding his gaze. Charles and Naomi sat together at their table, Marcus whispering strategies. Charles's presence was commanding, but it was Naomi's trembling determination that captured the jury's eyes. The judge called the case to order. Petitioner, Mr. Leonard Whitmore, claims temporary guardianship of Ethan Donovan due to questions of parental legitimacy. Respondents, Mr. Charles Donovan and Ms. Naomi Brooks, contest. The air was razor sharp. Whitmore's lawyers went first. They painted Naomi as irresponsible, an unwed teenager who had abandoned her child. They portrayed Amelia as a selfless mother who had raised Ethan for 12 years. They even hinted that Charles had turned a blind eye, caring more for his fortune than for the boy. Naomi sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes as the words cut deep. When it was her turn, she rose slowly. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger with every word. Yes, I was 16, yes, I gave him up, but I did it because I loved him, because I had nothing, and I thought he deserved better than me. I scrubbed floors while wondering if he had enough to eat. I cried myself to sleep praying he was safe. I carried that pain every single day. She turned to Ethan, her eyes brimming. But I never stopped loving you, and when I gave you my kidney, I didn't do it for gratitude or money. I did it because you are my son, my flesh, my blood, my heart, and I will fight for you until my last breath. The courtroom was silent, even the judge's expression softened. Then Charles stood. His voice thundered through the chamber. This boy is not a pawn in anyone's game, not mine, not Naomi's, and certainly not Leonard Whitmore. He is a child who deserves love, not manipulation. He turned, eyes burning into Leonard's. You talk about stability, but what stability comes from lies, from schemes? You bought him like property, you've used him as leverage, and now you want to steal him from the people who actually love him. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Leonard's smug smile faltered. But it was Ethan's voice that silenced everything. Can I say something? He asked timidly. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Go ahead, son. Ethan stood, his small frame trembling but his voice clear. I'm tired of being fought over. I'm tired of secrets and lies. I don't care about blood or money. I just want to be with the people who really love me, and I know who they are. He turned to Naomi, his eyes wet. She's my mom. She gave me life twice. She never stopped loving me even when I didn't know it. Then he looked at Charles, and he's my dad, maybe not by blood, but he's the one who held me when I was sick, the one who never gave up on me. Finally, Ethan turned to Leonard, his voice hardened. And you don't love me, you only want to use me. I don't want to live with you, ever. The words shattered the courtroom. Naomi sobbed openly, Charles's throat tightened. Even Amelia wept silently in the back row. The judge's gavel struck, order. After a tense pause, the judge delivered the ruling. Given the testimony and evidence, guardianship of Ethan Donovan is hereby granted to his biological mother, Ms. Naomi Brooks, and Mr. Charles Donovan. Mr. Leonard Whitmore's petition is denied. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed outside to deliver the breaking news. Naomi collapsed into tears of relief, clutching Ethan to her chest. Charles wrapped them both in his arms, his composure finally breaking. Leonard stormed out, his face twisted with rage. Amelia didn't follow. She sat frozen, her world crumbling in silence. Back at the Donovan estate, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time in weeks, laughter echoed again. Ethan played in the garden, Naomi by his side. Charles watched them from the terrace, a small smile tugging at his lips. The empire might be scarred, the reputation tarnished, but his family was whole. Amelia, however, couldn't bear it. One evening, she quietly packed her bags. She stood in Ethan's doorway for a long moment, tears streaming, before whispering, I'll always love you even if you can't love me back. And then she was gone. In the weeks that followed, Naomi began to adjust, not as a maid, but as a mother finally claiming her place. Charles stood beside her, their bond growing stronger with every shared glance, every decision made for Ethan's sake. The scandal faded, the company slowly recovered, the press found new stories. But in the Donovan household, the story wasn't about wealth or power anymore. It was about love. On Ethan's next birthday, he stood between Charles and Naomi, smiling brighter than he had in years. As they sang, he whispered quietly to himself, Finally, I'm home. And for the first time, everyone believed it.